Hi friends, it's Jim Alfredson here in my home studio with the wonderful Hammond XK5. I want to give you some tips and tricks to get the most out of this beautiful instrument. So let's begin. Alright, so the first thing I would like to teach you is how to actually navigate through the menus and submenus of the XK5. Before we can tweak the parameters we want to tweak, we need to be able to access them. So our main buttons we're going to be using are over here on the left. We have menu exit, enter. We have the dial, value dial, which changes our value of what we've selected. And we have these navigation buttons here, up, down, left, and right. So if we press menu exit, that'll take us into the first submenu, submenu A. If we press up, we'll now be in submenu B. Up again, submenu C, D, E, and F. The word that is flashing is the currently selected submenu that we can enter again, because there's layers of menus. If we use our navigation buttons, we can navigate over to those different options. Let's go back to the A. We can use our value knob too, as you can see. I'm turning it to the left and it's automatically going through the different submenus. So say we want to enter the drawbar submenu. It's flashing. We just press the enter button and there we are. So anytime anything is flashing, that's what's currently selected. And that's what we can change with the value knob. If we press menu exit, we'll back out one level. Let's say we want to go into patch. We navigate over there with our navigation buttons or with the value knob. Press enter, and now we're in the patch submenu. And then one more example. Let's say we want to go into the amp and effects. We press enter, and now we're there. Now, anytime you see these arrows, once you get into a submenu, that means there's more in that direction. So if we press an up arrow, we've now entered another page. Up again, another page, up again, and now there's nothing up, it's just down. But we have stuff to the right. That's what that little right arrow means. So if we press the right arrow, there's all these parameters in here. So there's multiple pages within these submenus. And you navigate through the pages with our navigation buttons. We can't use the value knob to navigate through these pages because the value knob is actually going to change the value of whatever parameter is currently flashing. Okay? We can press menu exit to back out again, and now we're back to our preset here. There is another way for quick access to many parameters. If the parameter that you want to edit has a dedicated button associated with it, you can press and hold that button for a few seconds and we'll be taken right to that submenu. For example, if we want to change the chorus vibrato, we have two chorus vibrato buttons right here. We can simply press and hold one of them, and now we're into the chorus vibrato submenu. Press play to back all the way out. Another example, if we want to change percussion, over here on the right side of the organ, we press and hold the percussion button, and now we're into the percussion submenu. So any parameter that has a dedicated button, overdrive, effects, reverb, percussion, chorus vibrato, control, even our presets, if we press and hold one of our presets, we'll go into the preset management page. Any of these parameters that have their own button, if you press and hold, you'll go straight to that corresponding submenu. Press play to get back to our main page. So now that we know how to navigate the submenu, let's dig in and actually start tweaking. The first thing I'd like to talk about is the Keyclick. Now, Keyclick is one of those things that the original Hammonds were quite known for, but it was something that Lorenz Hammond himself did not like, and he attempted to mitigate it and minimize it as much as he could throughout the years by using certain filter networks and such. But it's become a signature of the Hammond sound, and it's something that jazz players and gospel players and rock players actually really like. So we can tweak the Keyclick to match the level that we prefer. Now, one of the main features of the XK5 is the multi-contact system. And the multi-contact system is directly related to how it actually produces Keyclick. The multi-contact system is a way to represent and emulate the contact system of a vintage Tonewheel Hammond. In a vintage Tonewheel Hammond, each of the 9 drawbars has a corresponding bus bar underneath the keys, and they are stacked vertically on top of each other. So on a vintage Hammond, it's quite possible to pull out all 9 drawbars, press the key extremely slowly, and you can actually hear it make individual contact with each drawbar, all 9 of them. Now, this feature of the organ, this design feature, is one reason why it plays and responds the way it does. There's kind of a misnomer that the Hammond organ is not velocity sensitive. Now, this is true in the sense that it does not change the volume of the notes, no matter how hard or soft you play. But it is velocity sensitive in the sense that it changes how the drawbars are triggered. If you're playing very rhythmically and you have several drawbars out, like maybe something like this, like a smiley type of registration, if you're playing very fast and very rhythmically, you're not necessarily going to make contact with all 9 bus bars under the keys, 1 for each drawbar. And that means that every note is not going to be exactly the same. It's not going to have the same harmonic content, and it's not going to be triggered exactly the same. And this is what really makes the Hammond sound unique. The XK5 emulates this with 3 physical contacts under each key, and then the remaining 6 contacts are generated virtually within the computer, within the DSP system. Okay, so if we do that experiment where we press very slowly on the key, there's our 3 physical contacts. Again, the virtual contacts come into play when you're actually playing at normal speed, and they're delayed by a certain amount. So if we play rhythmically, like I was saying, I'm not making full contact every single time, so you get those kind of, and this is where the Keyclick comes from. So the Keyclick in the Hammond XK5 is a little more complex than in other digital organs. It's a little more realistic. In fact, it's a lot more realistic. So to edit it, we have to go into the drawbar menu. So we press menu, we see drawbar is already flashing, we press enter. And here is our model of organ we're using. We're using an A100. We can also use a B3 or a C3. And here's our Keyclick parameters right here. CON means that it's using the contact database that's already set up in here, and you can change how the contacts respond. These are for the virtual contacts, with the delay on each one, which drawbar they're affecting. That's beyond the scope of this video. For the purpose of this video, we're going to use the standard default settings for that. So we're not going to mess with this particular parameter. The one we want right here is the T parameter, which deals with the overall time offset, and then the D parameter, which is the damping factor of the virtual multi-contacts. So if we set this to 0 and we set this to 0 and we listen to our key click, doesn't sound too bad. It's already less than it was. I don't know if you remember where it was. As we pull out more drawbars, the key click increases as well. And that's what happens on a vintage Hammond. It's not the same for every single registration. Let's use kind of a standard rock registration here. So now we have a little bit more high-end content. And let's play with our time constant here. You can hear as I'm turning this up that the release is getting a little bit longer and the attack is getting a bit shorter. That's the time offset. Likewise, if we use the damping parameter, the key click becomes more pronounced and a little bit shorter. You can hear how it's changing the release key click as well, because there's key click on the release of the key as well. So these two parameters are the ones that you use to set the key click. And it's kind of a personal taste thing. You can kind of experiment with it and figure out something you like. And what I find is that it really depends on what you're playing the organ through as well. If you're playing through a Leslie, a vintage Leslie with tubes, you might want more key click because vintage Leslies tend to be a little dark. If you're playing through a more modern Leslie like the 3300, you might want less because that tends to be a brighter Leslie. If you're playing through a pair of powered speakers, you might want less because they're a little more high fidelity than a Leslie is. So it really depends on what you're playing through. And this can be saved per preset. So we can set up a sound on one of these presets here for playing through powered speakers, and we can set up another sound for playing through Leslie if you change, per gig, which I often do. Okay? I'm going to set this back to a setting that I like. That's pretty good. Let's leave it there. So that's the key click. The second thing I'd like to talk about is the overdrive. In the XK5, there's actually 3 separate places where we can introduce some overdrive. And the overdrive can be anything from very subtle coloration and saturation to full-on John Lord-esque Deep Purple rock and roll. The first place we're going to explore is the real tube section of the XK5. Like its predecessors, the XK3 and XK3C, it does feature 2 genuine real vacuum tubes in the preamp section. And these tubes are meant to emulate the tubes that are in a preamp of a classic vintage Tonewheel organ. And they're also meant to add subtle coloration and saturation to the sound. They're not necessarily meant for full-on overdrive and distortion, although they can do some of that to an extent. So to get there, one of the main confusing points, and I've talked to people online about this, is they think that the overdrive button and knob over here are controlling the tubes, and they are not. This is for the DSP overdrive, which we'll get to in just a second. To get to the tube overdrive, we have to go into the menu. There's no quick access to it. So we press menu, we press up, up again, and now we see amp/EFF is flashing. That's amp/effects. We press enter, and here we are in our tube routing page. So there are two tubes, as I mentioned. I'm going to turn this all the way down so we can start from a blank slate. There's a 12AX7 and a 12AU7. The difference is the AU7 tends to have a little less gain than an AX7. And each of these tubes has two sides that we can use either one or both at the same time. So we can use either both sides of the same tube, or we can route one tube into another tube, and vice versa. And that's what this routing parameter does. Right now it's set to route the X7 to the U7 tube. We can also change that with our value knob and go U7 to X7. We can go from one side of the U7 to the other side of the U7. And we can go from one side of the X7 to the other side of the X7. All of these different routing options sound slightly different from each other, so it's really about finding the one that you prefer. Let's go back to X7 to U7, and we'll start turning up the drive, and we'll see what we have here. So we're getting a little bit of crunch there. It's not too drastic, but it's pretty nice. But if you're playing those kind of chords, it might be a little too much, but I'm just using this as an example of what it sounds like. Let's go to U7 to X7. A little bit more. Here's just the U7. Kind of an interesting sound. And here's the X7. A little more rounded. So again, this is meant to add kind of coloration or saturation or kind of a warm glow around the sound. It's not necessarily meant to do that kind of overdrive. So the settings that I tend to prefer for it are somewhere around the 30s into the 40s. And I like the U7 to U7, but let's see what this one sounds like. That's pretty nice. Let's listen to it with no drive at all. Now I'm going to increase the drive. U7 to U7. It's a pretty nice tone. It's just adding kind of a roundness to the sound, especially in the high end. That's what tubes do. Very nice. So that's our first type of saturation or overdrive. Our second is the DSP, which I mentioned earlier. If we back out of this menu, we can enter the DSP overdrive menu by pressing and holding the overdrive button. And here we are. Likewise, we can also enter it by going to menu, up, amp effect, press enter, press up again, and here we are into the overdrive menu. So we do have a button, a dedicated button for on and off. We also have a dedicated button for the drive, which is kind of nice. Then we have this parameter right here, EX to OD. What does that mean? This means that the expression pedal is driving the input to the overdrive. In other words, as we pull back on the expression pedal, the overdrive lessens. We can also do overdrive to expression pedal. What this means is that the expression pedal only affects the overall volume of the organ. It doesn't affect the actual amount of overdrive. The amount of overdrive stays the same. To demonstrate this, let's turn our drive up here. And we're going to use the DSP tube style. This is our type. We'll go through those in just a second. You You can see already that's much nastier than the real tube overdrive. And that's the point. This is meant to be like kind of after the preamp of the organ. You have, say, an effects loop on your B3 and you put it through a stomp box, and this is what you're getting. All right. So as I pull back on the expression pedal, when I have it from EX to OD, we should get less overdrive and less volume. So I can go from totally clean to totally overdriven. If we use OD to EX, that means that the overdrive stays the same no matter what, and the volume of the organ changes. So I'm going to start real soft. And as you can hear, the amount of overdrive doesn't change, it's just the overall volume of the organ. We also have overdrive only, and what this does is it keeps the level of the organ the same, but the expression pedal changes the amount of overdrive. As I turn it up, so the organ level doesn't change, but the overdrive amount changes. Very cool effect. And lastly, we have this input, which is kind of a combination of the first one and the third one. In other words, the volume of the organ does change, but it doesn't change as much. So everything gets a little bit louder, but not as loud as the first setting. So let's put it back to EX into overdrive. And we have 4 different types. We have tube, which we just heard. We have solid state, which is more of a transistor style overdrive. To me, that kind of reminds me of like the Dave Stewart Canterbury prog scene, where they used to put, the Hammond Spinet models through like a fuzz box of some kind, a fuzz pedal. Pretty cool. Then we have clip, which is kind of like a stomp box, a little warmer than the solid state. I like that. And then we have EP amp, which is kind of emulating the electromagnetic pickups on a electric piano, like a Tyne piano. And I find that this one works better at much more subtle drive levels, like somewhere in here. And that's still a little too much for me. How about we put it about right there? Maybe even a little less. And there it is, off. Pretty cool. So that's our DSP overdrive, which is here on this button and this knob right here. And finally, there's a third type of saturation effect in the organ. If we go down from this menu, here it is right here. If we want to get there from the play screen, we go menu, up, up, enter, up, and here we are. It says trans drive hist. What is this? The XK5 and the new engine from Hammond Suzuki models every little detail of the original vintage Hammond B3 and Tonewheel organs. And one of the things that makes a vintage Hammond sound the way it does is the matching transformer. The matching transformer is this big circular metal, kind of tubular shaped component on the upper right hand side if you're looking at the back of the Hammond. And what it does is it matches impedance. So it takes the very low signal and low impedance of the tone generator and the tone wheels, and it matches it to the high impedance, high input signal of the tube preamp. And this is where the organic kind of breathing quality of vintage Hammond comes from. Because one thing that transformers do is that they act as kind of a natural compressor. And I don't mean compressor in terms of data rate compressor or, I mean a compressor in terms of like audio dynamics. So in audio dynamics, a compressor takes a signal that has, say, this dynamic range where the low, soft stuff is down here, the very soft volume, and the high volume is up here, and it makes the soft more loud and it makes the loud more soft. So it just kind of squeezes or compresses the dynamic range of the material. And that helps kind of glue everything together, right? So if you have your percussion on and it's really rocking and you got a bunch of drawbars out, instead of everything just getting super loud and obnoxious, it kind of squeezes it together and glues it together and makes it feel whole, okay? And the matching transformer is also responsible for the volume changes of the drawbars themselves. So everything is running through this matching transformer in a vintage Hammond, and it really colors the sound in a very interesting way. So we can control how much we're driving, how hard we're driving that virtual transformer in the XK5, the virtual matching transformer. And we can also adjust the hysteresis. So hysteresis, the best way that I can describe it is it's kind of like memory foam, right? If you lay on a piece of memory foam, it kind of contours to your shape and then it remembers that shape for a split second longer than, say, like a regular blanket. Hysteresis is kind of the same thing. It kind of remembers the qualities of the audio and the compression and the frequency response and stuff for a little bit longer once the signal leaves. So it's almost like the attack and release times on a dynamic compressor. And we can control the amount of hysteresis, or the amount that the virtual transformer remembers, with this function here. And so what this does is it kind of, as I said, glues everything together. The biggest example I can think of how to demonstrate this is with percussion, because the Hammond percussion is very specific. And so many digital organs, the percussion sounds like it's kind of sitting on top of the sound, right? It's just kind of added on top, and it's not integrated into the sound as it is on a vintage Hammond. The virtual matching transformer removes that type of sound, and it actually helps integrate everything together. So here's an example. We can actually change, if we go over to the right, we can change how much the matching transformer is actually affecting the upper manual, the lower manual, the percussion itself, and the pedals, all separately. So I'm going to turn the percussion down all the way. I'm going to turn the drive down all the way as well, just to make sure. And we're going to listen to the percussion without any of this effect on. Turn our Leslie to stop. It doesn't sound bad, but it's just kind of sitting there. So let's turn our drive back up to where it was. Sounds the same because we're not affecting it yet. Let's start turning this up. Ooh. Do you hear that? So not only does the percussion become just a bit louder, it becomes a part of the sound, and it gets that woody quality that the vintage B3 has, especially down low. Let's put it on second and put it on normal. I don't know if you guys can hear that or not, but it's almost like mixing everything together, mixing your ingredients together and getting a whole rather than these individual parts. We'll put it back down to the default. So again, this is not overdrive in the traditional sense, but what it's doing is it's like a saturation effect. When you deal with like tape saturation or limiting saturation or in modern recording, tape emulation. Saturation is all about bringing things together, gluing it together without losing the sense of dynamics that you had before. So we're not really losing our dynamics at all. What we're gaining is a clarity and a mixing of the signals that sounds more natural. Let's turn this drive up a little bit. Ooh, that sounds really good. All right. So our hysteresis. You can see the percussion's kind of folding back into the sound a little bit more. I kind of like it low where it was before. Maybe we'll put it about there. So this is a very subtle setting, but it's also very important to the overall sound. I find that the settings that they have from the factory are great. I haven't really found anything better. So that would be a drive of about 64 and your hysteresis setting at about 30 and these at 32, 132. But you can experiment with this and find something that sounds better to you. All right, let's talk about leakage. So in a vintage Hammond, they have a thing called the Tonewheel generator, and it's all these little spinning tone wheels. Each one has a electromagnetic pickup above it. Since they're in such close quarters with each other, some of the pickups actually pick up the sound of the other tone wheels next to them, and you get this thing called leakage. This was another feature that Lorenz Hammond didn't really like and was trying to mitigate and minimize as much as he could using filters and such, but it's something that really adds to the character of the Hammond sound. And different organs, depending on their the age and their quality of the components in terms of where they were stored and such, have more leakage than others. And we can actually control how much leakage we have on the XK5 by going to Menu, pressing Enter for drawbar, cycling over with our right button until we get to this menu here that just says Leak. I'm going to turn this all the way down and play a chord, and you'll kind of hear a sound with barely any leakage in it. And it sounds fine, but watch what happens when I turn this up. We get some of those upper harmonics in the sound, you know, leaking into our other drawbars. And so this is really just a taste. I had mine set at 64 for a long time. 74 sounds good too. Again, here's it all the way down. So if you turn it all the way up, you're getting kind of an organ that maybe the capacitors in the filter section aren't doing their job anymore, and they call it real leaky. But it sounds cool if that's what you like. I like mine about half and half, so maybe around 70, 64, 74, somewhere in there. And again, this really depends on what you're playing the organ through. I found that more modern Leslie's, the leakage is more pronounced, so maybe you want to turn it down. And this can be saved per patch as well. But that's the leakage. It's very simple to adjust. Let's talk about the chorus vibrato next. We can enter the chorus vibrato submenu by pressing the chorus button and holding it down, and there we go. We can also get there by pressing Menu, Up, Up. There's Vibrato and Chorus right there. We want to navigate with our side button over to that until it's flashing. Press Enter, and here we are. So the XK5 models 3 different types of chorus vibrato. Over the years, Hammond changed subtle things with it, types of capacitors, the component values, type of inductors and such. And the changes are very, very subtle. They're actually best heard on the vibrato setting, so I'm going to turn this on to Vibrato 3 and play with the first model, which is from 55 to 57. Now I'm going to switch to the next one, 57, 59. You can hear that there's a little more high end in this one. Here's 59 plus. A little less high end is kind of in between the first two. Let's listen to the change on the chorus. Here's C3 chorus. Very, very, very subtle. So that's just personal taste, what you like. And then the speed of the chorus, the default is 6.83, but we can change it by very small amounts, all the way down to 5.78 and all the way up to 7.9. Somewhere between 6.5 and 6.7, I think, is correct. That sounds great. And then here's an interesting parameter. This is called the mix parameter. So this controls the amount of direct signal versus affected signal. And so if you have an older, like 2 series organ, you might know that the C3 setting in the chorus is very, very light. There's not a lot of depth there. And you can emulate that here with this parameter. So as we turn this to the left, we're getting more and more direct signal until we basically don't have any chorus at all. All we have is that high emphasis, which is what the chorus vibrato does. It adds a high emphasis. As we turn back to the right, we get more and more until the dry signal and the wet signal are even. And then as we keep going to the right, we get more and more of the affected signal until we've got nothing but chorus, which sounds kind of goofy. So for a more modern, like say a late 70s B3 or a late 60s B3, I should say late 60s or mid 70s because they stopped in 74, 75, I think. You probably want something like that, real deep. My old C2 is more over here. Maybe even this much. It's all just personal taste based on what is your ideal Hammond sound. And then this parameter right here controls whether or not the lower chorus vibrato affects the pedals. So we can turn the chorus vibrato off on just the pedals and still have it on the lower manual, which is kind of nice if you want a real direct bass sound. But the default is to have it on because that's how the vintage Hammonds were. Let's talk about the percussion. We can enter the percussion submenu by pressing and holding any of the percussion buttons. And there we go. We can also enter it by going Menu, Up, and over to Percussion and press Enter. Now we can control the level of the percussion on soft and on normal. That's pretty standard, nothing too crazy there. Just kind of set that to taste. We can control the decay of both. Again, pretty standard, nothing really crazy there. But this is pretty cool. This is affects the way the percussion responds to your playing. On a vintage B3, the percussion is single trigger, meaning if I play a chord, let's turn that on high here. We'll get all the notes of the chord. I can even arpeggiate it like I was doing really quickly. But if I arpeggiate it too slow, it disappears because it only has one envelope. So it's single trigger. If I play this chord and I hold it and I try to play something else, there's no percussion. What this parameter does is it turns that off so that it re-triggers every single time no matter what. I can hold this and still get percussion down here. A vintage B3 did not work this way, but that might be something that you want to do, and I can see how you would use that for different effects. If we press up again, we get to the percussion 1-foot cancel. So on a vintage B3, the percussion actually comes from the 1-foot drawbar, and thus that drawbar is non-functioning when you turn the percussion on. So here it is. When I turn the percussion on, the 1-foot drawbar is gone. This allows you to use both. So that's kind of neat. And then soft, when you use the percussion on normal volume, it lowers the drawbars in volume. Check this out. I'll hold the drawbars. I will hold the drawbars and turn the percussion from soft to normal. Right, so we're losing some volume in our drawbars when we use the percussion on normal, which is where the percussion is very loud. If we don't want that, we can turn this off, and now it doesn't matter if I have it on soft or normal, the drawbar volume stays the same. This was a common mod back in the day because a lot of people wanted to have the volume and the thunkiness of the percussion on normal, but they didn't want to lose the drawbar sound behind it. So there we go. You can do that now just with the flick of a value knob. So starting with the 2 series, the foldback of the 16-foot drawbar on the manuals changed quite a bit. What I mean by that is with the older models like the BC and the BCV and the CV, they had complex tone wheels that on the 16-foot drawbar that went all the way down to the bass, to the lowest note. On a B3, they repeat themselves. So if I play this, as soon as I get to this B, it repeats this one, right? It's just softer, but it's the same note. They did this to cut costs because originally the Hammond was, of course, meant to be a substitute for a pipe organ. That meant that a lot of the music that was being played on it was liturgical, and you don't really use a 16-foot registration down in this octave anyways. So they cut them out to save a little bit of money, which is understandable. However, that sound is a really cool sound. I used to have a 1939 BCV, I believe it was, that went all the way down on the 16-foot drawbar, and it was very, very cool. And you can set that here in the menus. If we go to Menu, Drawbar, press Enter, scroll over until we get to this low fold high. This sets the low fold back and the high fold back. So we can turn this down all the way down to 1C, and now check out what happens. Ooh. Big bass, right? And that's a different sound than we might be used to if we're Jimmy Smith acolytes and we're playing our that dirty thing. Right? It's a little bit different. Really deep, and it's kind of cool. And of course, this can be saved per preset if we like. Likewise, the high foldback is set up on the upper G here. Turn the percussion off, sorry. And we can extend that up into the high C. Now this is one that's kind of interesting because it almost makes the Hammond sound kind of like a transistor organ, right? We're not really used to that sound. So I'm going to leave that one where it was. Much better. Another interesting feature in the Hammond XK5 is the ability to adjust the pedal registration harmonic content. If you have a Hammond at home, a vintage Hammond, you might notice that the pedals sound a little bit different on yours than they do on the XK5, but we can adjust how much harmonic content is in those pedal registrations. On the original vintage Hammonds, they had what they called complex pedal tone wheels, which had more harmonic content than the tone wheels that they used for the standard manual drawbars. And so, for example, right, if we go back into our drawbar menu and we change our foldback to go all the way down and we listen to this low C, it's almost a pure sine wave. There's not much in there except for the fundamental. But on the low C on the pedals, there's a lot more harmonic information in there. And we can adjust that harmonic information by going to Menu, Up, Pedal Registration, ped.reg right here. Press Enter. Now we have 3 different user presets that we can save, so we can come up with something that we like and just save it and use it anytime we want. And we also have 3 factory settings. So let's start with this user setting. If we go up again, we can name it whatever we want. And if we go up again, now we have our harmonic content. So right now we're on the fundamental pitch. If we turn this down, you see the fundamental just disappears. That's the first harmonic. Third harmonic. Third harmonic. Fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. So with these, you should be able to match the exact harmonic content of your bass pedals on your vintage Hammond if you're trying to recreate that. If we keep going over, we can go up to the 8-foot and do the exact same thing. There's the fundamental and all the different harmonics. It's really, really interesting. Speaking of bass, if we just have a single manual XK5 and we don't have the lower manual, we can still play left-hand bass with a different registration using the split button. There's a dedicated split button over here on the left side. If we press this, we're now using our lower drawbars, and yet we still have our upper sound up on the upper side. Likewise, we can actually assign the pedal drawbars to the lower manual by using this pedal to lower dedicated button, which gives us a nice low pedal sound. But here's a really cool feature. If we don't have bass pedals, but we still want to have the Jimmy Smith style, what they call the hump, where you're playing the bass pedals very staccato right on the front of the note and just tapping them really, really short. We can shorten the decay of the bass pedals to get that effect on just the lower manual. We do that by going pedal sustain button right here. We press that. We press and hold. and we'll get into the pedal sustain menu. We can see our decay is set to C, which means constant. It means it just stays on no matter what. But if we lower this all the way to 1, now we get, right? Let's listen to just the pedals by themselves. So when we combine that with our left hand, we get kind of the Jimmy Smith thing. Let's turn it down just a bit, it's a little loud. Here we go. Here's without. Here's with. Right? Gives us that hump. Very, very cool. Now let's talk about the digital Leslie. The digital Leslie in the XK5 is very, very good and has a ton of different parameters to kind of tweak to your liking. I'm not going to go through all the parameters because there's a bunch, but we can kind of briefly give an overview of what they do. To get to our Leslie, we can press and hold any of the Leslie buttons, or likewise we can go menu, up, and over to Leslie, boop, press enter, and there we go. So we have 8 different slots to save our own presets, and we have 8 factory presets that cannot be overwritten, so no matter what you do, you always have the factory ones to go back to. Let's start on this one, which is one of my custom ones based on the 145 Wild preset. If we go up, we can give it a different name, and here we can choose the type of speaker that we're dealing with and how it's mic'd. Is it mic'd on the front or is it mic'd in the back with the louvers off? So let's listen to this a little bit. There's rear. See, it's a little brighter and more direct. 122 front. 122 rear. I should have gone all the way back to 145 front, 145 rear. It's funny that I'm using the 145 Wild preset, but I'm using a 147 front model. It's because I didn't change the name. We have the cone type. Kind of a cool sound. And then, of course, our direct, like, PR40 cabinet with a big bass. Big bass. So for this, let's just go back to our 147 front sound. So if we press up again, now we get into our different parameters. We can see we have an arrow that points to the right, so that means there's more parameters over there, and arrows that point up, that means there's more stuff up there. So we can control the slow speed and the fast speed of the horn, the rise time, the fall time, the break time, and the width of the mics, the center of the mics, the distance, all sorts of stuff in here. Same parameters for the drum rotor. And here's where things get really interesting to me. So they've included the sub parameter, and this is very important because if you're kicking bass on a Hammond organ through a Leslie, that bottom rotor spinning around makes the bass a little nebulous, right? And one of the recording tricks that Rudy Van Gelder came up with back in the 50s and 60s is to record a direct out off of the Leslie. It might even been off the organ, but it was probably off the Leslie. So taking the signal before it even gets to the Leslie and recording that, and then mixing that in with the Leslie mic'd sound. And that gives you like a really nice full bass sound. Well, we don't have to do that because we have that right in here in the menu. All we have to do to hear the difference is we'll turn the sub all the way down and play a little bit of bass. See how nebulous that bass is? Whoa, 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 whoa. That's a little annoying. And we could go and change, you know, the mics where they are, the distance. make the distance farther away so it's not so wub wub wub. But then we lose some of that cool wubbiness, which is actually kind of neat. A better thing to do is to use the sub control. So if we turn this up, ooh, now we got bass. Right? That sounds really good. So it gives us a nice control over the direct amount of bass that we have coming through the Leslie without losing the Leslie effect itself. Very nice. And of course we can adjust the level of the drum and the horn independently as well. And external Leslie channel, we don't need to worry about that. But there's a lot of different parameters in here that we can change and alter. And what I would suggest you do is start with one of the factory presets, like say, I like this 31H one because it takes so long to slow down, just like those old single speed Leslies. Start with something like that and just start experimenting and find something that you like. If you want the stereo spread to be wider, you can do that. If you want the mics to be closer or farther away, you can do that. And add in as much sub as you need. Let's talk about the multi-effects real quick. Over here, we have this effect button. If we turn this on, well, let's press and hold first, and we can see that we have all sorts of different effects in here. We have chorusing, delays, flanger, phaser, ring mod. The ring mod's kind of cool because it alters the frequency of the ring mod with the expression pedal. The wah-wah is quite cool because it turns the expression pedal into the wah. And we can change the frequency so we can get a little more high end in there. Right, that's a very cool effect. We have auto panning. It's kind of interesting. And tremolo, which is different, of course, than chorus or vibrato. So those are very interesting. We can play around with those and get different effects and save those per patch. And also, let's talk about the reverb real quick. If we press and hold reverb, we go into the reverb settings. I'm really happy they included a spring reverb because it reminds me of the old spring reverbs that are in Leslie's. But here's the setting that I think is really cool. You can of course choose, different types of reverb, but I like the spring. But if we go up here, Les on reverb. So this puts the Leslie either after the reverb or it puts the reverb into the Leslie simulation. So right now it's into the Leslie simulation, which sounds like this. I'll turn it up so you can hear. Hear how the reverb's spinning. Or we can have it after the Leslie. Then we get a big wide stereo reverb. So it really just depends on what you like. I like the spring reverb into the Leslie because it reminds me of the old stuff. Right? Finally, let's say that we have built the perfect preset and we want to save it. Saving is very simple. We go to Menu, Patch. We give it a name using our value knob and our arrow keys to go over. Let's call this one 007. Then we press record. We find a user slot we want to put it in. Let's put it in this one since it's blank. press enter, and there we go. Now, assigning that patch to the preset keys here is a little different. Right now it's on C#, because that's where my other one was. But you can change how these are assigned by pressing and holding. And now we're on the favorite assignment page. So we can press which preset we want to change. Let's say we want to change the C#, which has 007 on it. We go over here and we choose which preset we want to be on that one. Let's say we want 99 to be over on that one. There's nothing in 99, so let's say 98. Okay? And now when we press play and we go out, 98 is trumpet. Now this will only work if we have a certain parameter turned on. If you've tried this and you've gotten frustrated because it doesn't seem to be taking, you have to turn a parameter on, and that parameter is in menu, go over to patch, enter, up again, up again, up again, until we get to this preset key submenu. You'll see this where it says favorite on. If that is turned to off, then this will not work. It'll just default to the patches that are in the bank that this preset section is set to. So by turning this on, we now have our trumpet set to C#. And again, we can go and change it back to 007. Now when we press C#, it's 007. Okay. Another important thing to notice when we're doing patches is the patch load system. So on a vintage Hammond console, the only thing that changes when you change the presets is the drawbar registrations themselves. The state of the percussion, the state of the chorus vibrato, the state of your Leslie spinning on or off, none of that stuff changes with preset. But since we're in the digital realm, we can have that stuff change if we so desire. So the way to do that is to go into menu, patch, up, 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 until we get to P-load link. Okay? If we go over one, we'll see we have all these different parameters that we can turn on or off as I keep going over. So the first one is this reg, which means registration. So that means that when you press a preset key, it's going to load the registration that's saved for that key. Now, of course, that seems pretty obvious. Why would we not want the drawbar registration to load with the patch? Well, if we were using the XK5 as a MIDI controller and we only wanted to use the actual 2 sets of drawbars to set our organ sound and the rest of the presets we wanted to use to trigger something else or to change patches on another synthesizer, and we didn't want our drawbar settings to change, that would be one reason to turn this off. The next is parameters. That's parameters. It's a litany of parameters, including the foldback settings, the tone wheel that you're using, the model organ you're using, B3, A100, C3. Basically anything that's not covered by these other parameters is covered under PRM, okay? Percussion is obviously percussion. You can have the percussion change with each preset, or you can have it just stay the same like it would on a real B3. If you turn this off, then it'll just stay the same no matter what is going on with the presets. Internal, external, that deals with the internal and external MIDI controllers. We won't worry about that right now. Effects, that's the effects section, including the Overdrive and the multi-effects that we went through earlier. Animation is the animation effects like Leslie and chorus vibrato. Reverb is obviously reverb. So all of these things can be set to actually change depending on whether or not the patch load parameter is turned off or on. For example, right now animation is turned off. So that means if I hit my fast speed on this preset or on this set of drawbars here, and I switch to this preset, the Leslie stays on. Right? If I have it off and I switch over, it stays off. If I turn this on, now if I have the Leslie on this preset, when I switch to this preset, it turns off because it was saved with that Leslie off on that preset. This one it turns on, that one it turns off. You see what I mean? And that works. Animation includes chorus vibrato as well. So if I have the chorus vibrato on this preset and I switch to this one, it's now off. So you have to kind of determine how you want your XK5 to work. Do you want it to work more like a vintage B3 where it's only changing registration, drawbar registrations and nothing else? Or do you want to mix and match it, kind of like I have? Like I want my reverb to stay the same no matter what I'm doing with the preset, so I have that off. But I want my effects to be per patch because I want to set up different effects on different patches. So it's really up to you. In regards to custom tone wheels, that's a subject for another video. Custom tone wheels are, they consist of a lot of different parameters, and I definitely suggest you dig in and kind of experiment a little, but before you do, make sure that you save your settings on a USB stick so that you can go back in case something drastic happens. Don't be scared, but at the same time, it's a daunting task to actually create a custom tone wheel set. If you do have a vintage Hammond at home, you might be tempted to try to recreate that sound of your vintage Hammond on the XK5 as close as possible. And you can definitely do that, but I think you could probably do that without getting into the custom tone wheel set and do it with the leakage and the Keyclick settings, the pedal registration settings, and the overdrive and Leslie settings. So thank you for watching. I really hope you've learned something from this video. By all means, watch it again, slow it down, pause it, and dig through these menus and really familiarize yourself with the parameters. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And I really think between the leakage, the Keyclick settings, and the overdrive settings, you should be able to fashion a Hammond sound that is right for you. Good luck and take care.